If someone on the street came up to you and asked, "Who are you?" would you know what to say? I'm a bit of an existentialist, so after getting over how creeped out I was that some random stranger came up to me and asked me a pretty intense question, I'd probably start mulling over what it means to be human, let alone who I am as a person. But I think even for the normal people in the audience tonight, it's a pretty difficult question to answer. What I hope to tackle today is a little less scary than that open-ended question. It's the problem of a sense of identity as a teenager, or rather the lack of one. I think this is a problem that needs to be tackled by both adults and teens like myself, and must start by actively encouraging teenagers to challenge authority. Before you get scared, when I say challenging authority, I'm in no way encouraging teens to talk back to their teachers just for the sake of it, or to let their emotions take control of them and wreak havoc. I've made my fair share of mistakes. When I was 14, I insisted on proving I was right when I told my chemistry teacher it would take more than a single lesson to finish a neutralization reaction. Though it did, and though I ended up having to redo a titration about 5 times, she definitely did not deserve my response. In the same year, when I thought that our geography teacher had unfairly graded our exams, I got a bit upset. And although most of my class agreed with me, I did not approach the situation with dignity, really. So there's a fine line between challenging authority and disregarding it. I believe that in order to challenge authority, you must first acknowledge and respect that the person you're intending to challenge is actually in a position of authority over you. I crossed that line because my emotion-driven reaction meant that all I could see was the correctness of my own point of view. I couldn't acknowledge that, firstly, my teacher probably had a reason for what they were doing. And even if they didn't, or even if the reason was bad, they were the ones that in the end actually decided the outcome. And so no matter how passionate or emotional I was, it wasn't going to convince them to listen to me. Really, it was just going to cause them an unnecessary amount of stress. To all the adults in the audience tonight, these events probably seem like the perfect examples of what you do not want to teach your kids or your students to do. You're probably thinking, oh great, a bratty teenager trying to justify their brattiness. Well, you're not wrong. I was pretty bratty, and I do think that it was somewhat justified. I'm no expert in neuroscience, but my mom is, and I'd like to think that I've sat through enough mother-daughter lectures to understand at least the basics of what's happening in my brain. So teenagers do have a tendency to disregard consequences. This is because our frontal lobes are not fully developed. This is the part of your brain that controls the higher cognitive functions, so decision-making and the regulation of emotional understanding and expression. This is the part of the brain that would have told me that my year 9 geography exam did not really matter much in the long run, and that doing a titration a few too many times would just make me really, really good at titrations. So what happens when it's not fully developed? Well, behind your frontal lobe is your limbic cortex. This is often called the caveman brain because it plays a huge role in regulating what hormones your body releases in response to emotion. So like the fight or flight response that most of you probably heard about. The problem is that the frontal lobe develops significantly slower than your limbic cortex. In fact, it doesn't finish developing until your mid-20s. So chances are, as a teen, your reactions and actions are going to be controlled by your limbic cortex, and so based upon impulse and not logical thought. But the frontal lobe does more than just regulate emotional understanding and expression. What's often forgotten is that the frontal lobe plays a huge role in developing a sense of personality. So as you learn more about yourselves and the world around you, your frontal lobe is developing a sense of who you are and who you want to be in the future. The entirety of your teenage years can pretty much be summed up by the Alice in Wonderland quote, "It's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then." I'm sure most of the adults in the audience have told a kid to choose their battles at some point of their lives. Though I agree that some battles can be pretty petty, I think it's important to acknowledge that not fighting that battle or even losing that battle can actually feel like compromising a part of your identity. Because a teen may not know if they want to be a historian, but they could know that hearing only one perspective of history makes them upset. They may not know if they're religious, but they could know that hearing gods being compared to superheroes can make them uncomfortable. I believe that encouraging teens to challenge authority is encouraging them to take that one extra step in discovering who they are, because the more they engage with the world around them, the more they can figure out how they fit in with it. And the truth is, our frontal lobes do eventually develop. And so what may start as a sassy comment will eventually mature into sophisticated questioning. Bearing this in mind, I hope that you can try and ignore how sassy a teen's tone of voice may be and focus on what they're saying. If you can, try and think about why they're saying it. But teens can't get off the hook quite so easily either. I've received countless eye rolls from my grandfather whenever I challenge one of his views. I've heard, "Your generation talks too much, more than I can remember." And this probably seems not surprising to you, considering my grandparents and probably many of yours were born into what's known as the silent generation, the generation that is known to value conformity. What may be slightly more surprising, however, is that teens love to silence each other more than our grandparents silence us. The urge to roll your eyes when someone challenges a view in class is completely understandable, because sitting your GCSEs, A-levels, IB exams are all extremely stressful things. I know that I've rolled my eyes a few more times than I'd like to admit. But I hope that we can cut each other a little slack sometimes. And even listening to someone else's challenge can help you learn something new about the world, or even learn a new way of approaching a familiar question. And so another person's engagement with the world around them can actually help the way that you perceive yourself and your own identity. So if you're not the type to challenge authority, why not try? If a point is raised in class or a method of teaching you disagree with, just speak up. Perhaps if someone comes up to you and asks, "Who are you?" you'll be able to respond with something like, "A person who has a passion for social justice, a person who loves the environment, or a person who never wants to stop discovering new scientific theories before you're even given the chance to get freaked out." I guess that my talk has been in part in defense of the louder or more rebellious teenagers, but it's also a reminder to be considerate of those who are finding out their own ideas worth sharing, and to encourage them to share those ideas. Thank you.